because you are living human beings, I'm going to assume that you know Google. You likely know Google as a search engine, useful for looking up stuff on the internet. But as a social scientist, my own primary fascination with Google is that it serves as a vast repository of society's collective output. It is our collective conscious in many ways. It's a way to chart trends and attitudes and beliefs of societies as a whole. And it is with this in mind that I recently placed 2 words into a Google image search. The first word, discomfort, yielded a variety of images, people doubled over in pain, holding their stomach, favoring achy joints, pressing their hands to their temples and squinting their eyes in apparent pain. But when I placed the second word, comfort, into the Google image search, I was rewarded with an entirely different set of images. Here, I was privy to pictures of wide leather seats on private jets, plush pajamas, soft mattresses. And I think it's interesting to contrast the images associated with discomfort with those associated with comfort, because the implication, I believe, is clear. Discomfort is internal. It is something that resides within the individual and is experienced subjectively. But its antidote, comfort, is to be found here, externally in our material world. And so it is, I believe, that, that humans, since antiquity, have been pursuing comfort with the same fervor that we pursue happiness. In fact, I'll just say that I think those 2 concepts are somewhat related. They're intellectual cousins. They're not perfectly synonymous. If you look up comfort in the dictionary, it is likely to give you definitions such as comfort is a state free of constraint, anxiety, pain. It's a sense of ease. And that sounds a bit like happiness. Maybe not perfectly so, but enough. So since antiquity, people have been pursuing comfort here in the world around us. You can imagine the first caveman who was using a rock as a pillow and said, "Ugh, want softer," and laid his head back down on a pile of pine cones. And that stretches right up until modern times, when a modern caveman was watching his widescreen TV with his feet kicked up on an ottoman and a blanket over him, and he said the modern equivalent of "ugh," which I believe is the American "eh." And he picked up the blanket and said, "Want warmer." And he invented the electric blanket, as if blankets, by their own nature, are somehow inadequate. Just not warm enough, we gotta pump them full of electricity to make them even cozier. You likely know that comfort is a psychological need because you're probably familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you recall, Maslow said we search to satisfy our most basic needs, hunger, thirst, and from there we go on to try and rectify problems with shelter and security, and then social belongingness, trust, social support, and only then can we chase our higher order goals. But again, in modern times, people misconstrue it. People think that Maslow somehow was writing us a prescription for the good life. But in 1954, when he first published his theory, that is not at all what he intended. He published it in a book called Motivation and Personality. This was a theory of motivation. Maslow was merely commenting on what drives us. And a principal component of what drives us, according to Maslow, is the search for comfort. But there have been many critics of comfort. Freud, for example, feared that people would put enjoyment before caution, and he said that would soon bring about its own punishment. I think Freud feared that people's own pursuit of pleasure and comfort was somehow selfish and that it might have negative social consequences. More damning still, the philosopher Hegel, he said, your need for greater comfort does not exactly arise directly within you. Rather, it is suggested to you by those who hope to profit from its creation. And I love that he said, your greater need for comfort. Because here we arrive at my thesis. Here I believe that in modern era, in an era of unprecedented wealth and technological advancement, where there's a burgeoning middle class emerging in many societies around the world, a comfortable class as I think of it, as we no longer seek comfort, but can actually achieve it, we can modify our circumstances like at no time before. As we achieve comfort, it narrows the range of experience with which we are comfortable, and we fall out of practice with grappling with hardship, navigating tough circumstances. As comfort becomes our new natural resting state, I believe it is making us psychologically weaker. And I blame the 1980s and 90s for this. Let's take a quick walk down memory lane. I grew up in the United States, and I grew up during the Cold War. It's a tiny bit embarrassing to me to admit this, although as a child, of course, at the time, but I grew up not afraid of Russians, but terrified of Russians. I used to lay awake at night, fearful that the USSR would do a preemptive nuclear strike on the United States and target, among the many targets that they might choose from, an Air Force base near my house. I literally grew up worrying that I would be killed in a nuclear explosion. And then the Iron Curtain fell, and we, Americans, breathed a collective sigh of relief. And it was not long after that that the apartheid system in South Africa was dismantled, and that Silicon Valley was on the rise, and our economy grew better. We lived in a unique era in history, an era of peace and prosperity where it seemed like the world was becoming a better place, where there was hope, where things just basically seemed good, i.e. comfortable. Interestingly, during this exact same period, we noticed an uptick in mental health problems. In 1996, for example, college campuses were treating anxiety in record numbers. It's the first year in history that anxiety was treated at the same numbers as depression had been before that, the chief complaint prior to that time. In 1980, the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the primary reference book for psychiatrists and psychologists and counselors, in 1980, this book was a whopping 494 pages. Fast forward almost a quarter century to 1994, and it had ballooned in size to almost twice its weight. Nearly 900 pages with 32 additional mental disorders that had sprung up even as we had become more comfortable. And I think that this is primarily important because of children. Our comfort addiction is our legacy to our children. Robert Bixler and Morton Floyd, two researchers, conducted a survey of hundreds of middle school students in Texas. And they asked them to place various modern conveniences on a scale ranging from not at all important to me to I couldn't live without it. Flush toilet. A flush toilet definitely was rated over on the I couldn't live without it side of things. And I find that extraordinary. I mean, take a moment and answer that question for yourself. How much do you believe that you could live without a flush toilet? I hope that you can do better than those middle school kids in Texas, because you can easily live without a flush toilet. Humans have done it for the vast majority of our existence. Not only that, but Bixler and Floyd also asked the kids about their disgust and fear about the natural world. And they found that kids who thought mud was icky and ticks were gross and had a number of arm's length relationships with the natural world preferred, predictably, indoor recreation. Essentially, they found that middle school kids in Texas liked friends, music, and the shopping mall. And what they didn't like was outside. And it's easy to point fingers at these kids and, wag our finger and say, oh, well, it's too bad they're so uncomfortable, except for the fact that we are all complicit in this. If you have kids, you're complicit. Even if you don't have kids, you are likely in a position where you can influence children. You have undoubtedly heard of helicopter parenting, parents who swoop in and try and intervene on their children's behalf. This is just a natural extension of a strong impulse to protect our children. We want the best for them. Psychologists often call this emotional safeguarding. In one study in Australia, they found that kids were being chauffeured to school at increasing rates. That is, their parents were driving them. Where the kids in the past may have walked or ridden a bike to school. And what they discovered was that the parents' decision to drive them to school, 60% of that decision was based on the parents' perception that the world is a fundamentally unsafe place. And you see the same kind of sentiment expressed in the parents' desires for their children at school. Sentiments like, I really want my daughter to be intellectually challenged. In addition, I would like her to have high self-esteem and to be accepted by her peers. Now let's linger on that point for a moment. The parents who recognize the value of intellectual challenge seem somehow blind to the idea that social and emotional challenge may confer the exact same types of self-growth benefits that an intellectual challenge does. And here, I leave you with what I hope is a radical notion. That we do not need to avoid negative psychological experiences or discomfort. That's what consumer society would have you do by purchasing a wide range of products and services that makes life comfortable. And we do not need to overcome psychological discomfort, as suggested by some in the psychological community, by somehow reframing negative experiences as positive experiences. I would recommend to you instead that you simply make friends with discomfort, that you tolerate discomfort because you can and you have. And in doing so, oddly enough, I believe you'll be happier. Thank you.